An older man, his coat threadbare. He sits in silence in the courtroom, facing the prospect of losing the only home he's ever known. No lawyer, no allies, only a thin stack of papers clutched tightly in his hands. The entire room regards him as a loser. The opposing counsel sneers. The gallery whispers derision. But what would make a veteran, one who's stared down bullets, choose silence in the face of such insults? Could he be hiding a secret powerful enough to still every voice in the room? James Carter's story is more than just an eviction case. It's a journey of resolve, of honor, and of one unexpected moment that shakes everything to its core. Join us as we uncover the path of the man who reminded the world truth needs no words to triumph. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more captivating and thrilling stories. James Carter, now 68. He lives a life of quiet seclusion in the cramped confines of apartment 2B in Chicago's aging neighborhood. For more than a decade and a half, he's paid his rent on the first of each month, never once late, despite his fragile health and a veteran's pension that barely covers his daily needs. The two-bedroom flat may not be perfect, but to James, it's home, a place filled with sweet and bitter memories. The evenings he and his late wife played endless games of dominoes, the old jazz tunes crackling from a time-worn radio, the simple wooden table where he sat each weekend, reading letters from old friends. One early morning last year, as pale sunlight sifted through the dusty window slit, James spotted a white envelope sealed firmly to his door. He hesitated to touch it, then drew his hand back as if burned. The glue was still wet. No sender's name, only the bold words, "Important notice." He placed the envelope on the table, hesitated, then gently nudged it open. Inside lay a coldly typed notice. Next month's rent would increase by $600, a sum far beyond his fixed pension, an increase he knew he could not manage. He ran the numbers in his head, $365 a month, plus a small medical stipend, basic living, electricity, water, gas, food, devoured nearly all of it. Where could he find $600 extra each month? Around him, the stairwell cracks gaped wide. The yellowed ceiling had never been painted. The rattling window quivered with every gust of seasonal wind. The landline phone sat dust-covered on its base, its cord long gone. Visitors rarely ventured inside, fearing they could offer no help. A few months ago, the new landlord had bought the building, loudly proclaiming a rental policy overhaul to boost profits. James understood change was inevitable, but why such ruthless measures so soon? He sank onto a wooden chair against the wall, his knees trembling. An unfamiliar disorientation washed over him. The kitchen table, its years of scratches etched deep, felt suddenly ice cold. Memories flooded back. Helen, his gentle wife, gone 3 years earlier. She once said that no matter how simple life was, as long as they had each other, it was happiness. They'd met at a veterans reunion. She'd smiled like summer sunshine in winter. He'd bowed his head, quietly taking her hand. After their wedding, they chose 2B for its affordable rent, close to the hospital where Helen volunteered as a nurse. Their love was simple, a bowl of hot soup, a round of dominoes, a soft blues tune drifting through the air. Now Helen was gone. The home held only James. He was accustomed to solitude, but never imagined a day when he'd have to fight to keep his last sanctuary. Calmly, he placed the notice on the table, then gathered his tattered service records from the shelf, discharge papers, rank insignia, medals, tokens that had once been his pride and his refuge through long, war-haunted nights. The faded elastic still held a few black and white photos, the dust-choked desert in central Vietnam, comrades in oil-stained uniforms, and Helen's radiant smile on their wedding day. He flipped through each page, then lifted his gaze to a small tarnished metal frame, Helen's smiling face beside his, under the dim yellow lamp of their living room. Time seemed to stand still. James recalled the thunderous knock on his barrack's steel door, the sleepless nights haunted by gunfire and bombs, and he remembered peaceful dreams of a silent seaside home with his wife and children gathered beneath swaying palms. But reality allowed no dreams. Next Thursday at 9:30 a.m., he must appear in court for his eviction hearing. James stared at the summons with solemn eyes. Yet inside, a flicker of resolve remained. He was no hopeless drifter. He had the honor of a soldier, his service records and the veteran benefits owed to him, memories of love and sacrifice, things no one could take away. That day, instead of giving up, James whispered to himself, "I will fight to the end." He tidied his work nook, packed his important papers into a battered briefcase, everything neat and ready for court. He called the Veterans Legal Aid Office, his voice calm yet unwavering. Though the process might be complex, he would try his hardest to honor those who sacrificed for the freedom and peace he now faced losing. That afternoon, he traced a finger along the staircase crack, then looked up at the stained ceiling. For a moment, he smiled. "If this building must crumble, let it fall where our love was carved." Strength surged through him. He straightened his back and climbed each step with purpose. Pausing by the small window, he gazed out at the bustling Chicago streets, the honking cars, the hum of passers-by, the steam rising from corner cafes. James Carter says little. He rarely confides in neighbors, seldom recalls the battlefields of his youth. But this moment, sitting before the courthouse, documents at his side, heart unbowed, will prove that even an aged veteran can stand up and defend his final right. He seeks no pity, only the chance to tell his story, to show that every life is precious, every home deserves protection. In the gray dawn, just as the first light of sunrise peeked through the dew-speckled window, James Carter sat upright on the neatly placed mat atop his wooden bench. His hands moved deftly, brushing and polishing, coaxing layer upon layer of black wax to vanish scratches into a subtle shine that caught the weak glow of the bedside lamp. These shoes were more than mere footwear. To James, they recalled the rigid discipline of military life, where impeccably shined boots stood for a soldier's honor and self-respect. He wasn't preparing to put on a show in court. He was preparing to uphold his dignity, to hold his head high beneath scrutinizing eyes. Behind him, on a humble chair in the corner, lay his white dress shirt, now slightly yellowed by time. With nimble fingers, James heated the back of a metal spoon over his gas burner, then used it to smooth the shirt's creases. Each sss, as the spoon glided over fabric, echoed in the silent room like a reminder of long days of training in sun-baked barracks, when he and his comrades drilled through heat and dust. The metallic scent rose, mingling with the familiar mustiness of apartment 2B. He folded his worn packet of documents, read and reread countless times, and tucked it squarely under his left arm. Inside were critical papers, a copy of his old lease agreement, veteran benefit certificates, and the legal information he'd painstakingly gathered over recent weeks. James hadn't crafted an elaborate speech, nor did he carry page-by-page notes. He simply envisioned arriving in court to listen attentively and to present his life story with the sincerity and honor bound up in the title, U.S. Veteran. Before stepping out, he paused at the door to admire a small framed photo on the wall, he and Helen, smiling gently on their wedding day. That image was his silent encouragement, a reminder that after all those years together, as simple as life might be, love and faith could sustain a person through any storm. He offered a quiet smile, locked the door, and stepped out carrying his composed calm and unspoken resolve. The Cook County Courthouse loomed as he descended the creaky stairs. He hesitated briefly at the worn incline leading to the entrance, where chipped mosaic stones bore the weight of time. He advanced step by step with firm resolve, merging into the line of people queuing at the security gate. His shoulders stooped with age, his left leg tingling from the cold pavement, yet his posture remained steadfast, shoulders back, chest open, gaze fixed forward. At the checkpoint, the guard offered no words, only swept a metal wand gently around James's body. The scanner beeped twice. His ID card and documents were set aside. James retrieved them with a hint of worry in his eyes, quickly replaced by composure. He understood that in the halls of justice, respect and procedure mattered more than any plea. He nodded once, and as the guard maneuvered into his bag's locked pocket, James murmured, "Thank you, soldier." A reminder to himself that he remained at heart a soldier, even decades beyond active duty. Inside the courtroom, a chill settled over the space. Fluorescent bulbs cast a stark white glow that reflected off the polished wooden bench. Long rows of benches lined the walls, empty spots interspersed with weary figures, some slumped, others flipping through dog-eared magazines. Sighs and rustling papers formed a weary soundtrack. James chose the back row, in the corner, where he could survey the entire room unnoticed. He placed his briefcase on the floor, straightened his back against the bench, and sat silent as a statue. Occasionally, he glanced left, at the young, sharply dressed attorney with a perpetual air of confidence, arms folded on the desk, eyes coldly scanning the room, sizing up which defendant might be ripe for today's proceedings. When James entered, the lawyer didn't even look up, as if the old man's presence were an inconvenient intruder. That disdain struck James's pride, but rather than anger, he felt serenity. He didn't need that man's approval. He needed justice and the protection of his own rights. Ahead sat the judge, a middle-aged woman, her black robe conveying solemn authority. Her gaze, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, swept the room. At her side, the court clerk arranged files, the steady rustle of paper marking the rhythm of business. James set aside all external worries, focusing on each knock, knock of the judge's gavel announcing the session's opening. That sound, like a drum's first beat, snapped him fully into the moment. When his name was called, James rose and walked to the podium. He bowed his head in respect to the judge, then handed his packet to the clerk. His steps were measured, unhurried. In that instant, every eye turned toward him. The landlord's hard stare, the young lawyer's narrowing gaze as he tapped his leather portfolio, the other tenants' subtle glances searching James for a spark of hope. He drew a deep breath, lifted his eyes to the judge, and spoke in a warm, steady voice. "Your Honor, I am here to present the truth and seek a fair resolution." Though his opening words were simple and concise, James knew that the power lay not in the quantity of his speech, but in how he conveyed his story, of a soldier who had fallen on battlefields and returned weary, of unwavering love for a departed wife, and of his earnest desire to protect the home he still called his. He did not beg for pity. He sought to be heard and respected, just as he had always respected himself and his modest apartment. In his calm, determined gaze, James Carter stood ready to fight with the integrity of a veteran, defending what was rightfully his. The court clerk tapped the gavel 3 times. Knock, 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 then read aloud the case name and file number. The courtroom fell silent. broken only by the rustle of papers and the quiet breaths of those present. When he called, "James Carter," the syllables lingered in the yellowed walls. The old man inclined his head slightly, stepped onto the witness stand like an anonymous prisoner. Yet his eyes burned with resolve. He pronounced his name clearly, his warm tones rising above the surrounding hush and indifference. Turning, James set foot on the creaky wooden floor and took the long bench reserved for defendants. He neither bowed to the judge nor faced the plaintiff's attorney. Instead, he offered a single, measured nod, an affirmation of his presence before justice. Opposite him sat the tall bench where the judge slowly turned the pages of his file. She was a middle-aged woman, her face worn from years weighing justice, her eyes moist with fatigue, yet focused on each document without glancing at James. The air was so heavy that every breath seemed audible. Fluorescent light poured down onto the desk, revealing yellowed stains around the window frame. The gallery benches held just enough seats, half empty, half filled by landlords and tenants awaiting their turn to claim their place. All watched the proceedings, though likely saw James as just another marginal figure. The plaintiff's attorney, a sharply dressed young man in a tailored gray suit, rose with confident poise. He strode forward, his voice smooth as though delivering a speech on stage. "Your Honor, we maintain that this eviction is straightforward and clear. The defendant, Mr. James Carter, has failed to pay rent for over 90 days. The lease contract clearly outlines his financial obligations, and despite the final deadline, Mr. Carter has not fulfilled them. We request that the court reclaim the property immediately to protect the landlord's rights." As he spoke, the lawyer pressed his pen onto the eviction notice, then glanced at James with a faint, challenging smile, as if daring any rebuttal. He continued, "Mr. Carter has chosen to self-represent without proper preparation or legal support. Any testimony he offers will lack foundation, coherence, and relevance to the lease agreement or the law." James said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the lawyer. He appeared to observe more than listen, registering every gesture, every expression. He noticed the contempt hidden behind the young man's frameless glasses, the slight lean when he spoke to the clerk, as though victory were already assured. He understood all too well that in this legal world, people are judged by appearance and social standing. Then James quietly clasped his file against his chest, his chin lifted and his lips pressed together. The image of the steadfast soldier returned in his mind. He and his comrades pitching camp amid dust and heat, orders barked in rapid succession, the roar of aircraft overhead. He recalled those dawn hours when all slept. He would toil cleaning his weapon, shining his boots, maintaining his gear. That discipline was never for show. It nurtured his sense of duty and self-respect, values he would not abandon for a mere eviction notice. The room seemed to contract as the attorney turned back to the judge, preparing to speak again. James closed his eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, then opened them, his gaze clear. In that silence, he heard the tick of the courtroom clock, the clerk's pen tapping paper, even the tenant's sighs, all proof that life moved on each day, even as some bore the weight of hardship. Finally, the lawyer concluded, "I respect the court's allowance for self-representation, but in reality, Mr. Carter lacks the necessary legal knowledge, and the plaintiff cannot endure any further delay." He folded the notice neatly, placed it on the desk, his eyes still fixed on James with smug satisfaction. The performance ended, leaving only the courtroom's midnight stillness. As the attorney returned to his seat, every eye turned to James. the old man sitting calm amid the storm. He did not rush into a defense. He knew that hasty words invite contempt. He needed time to gather his focus, to arrange his thoughts, like fitting the final pieces into life's puzzle. He shifted slightly, moved his file to his left, and laid out his proof. The original lease agreement, his veteran benefit certificate, and the requests he'd filed with local authorities for assistance. Once more, he studied the judge, whose authority decided the fate of families like his. She inclined her head, her gaze etched with concern, as though ready to listen. James understood that this moment was his only chance to tell his story. Of months spent fighting on distant battlefields, of the beloved wife he'd lost, of the little apartment 2B, brimming with memories and testament to untold sacrifices. He would not beg for pity, only hope to be heard and respected. The other tenants whispered among themselves, their eyes seeking a spark of hope in James. One, seated nearby, gently squeezed his hand, a look of comfort in her eyes. In that stark courtroom, James felt a flicker of warmth from this shared community, people bound by similar fears of losing home. That small solidarity energized him, like a faint current in the dark. At last, the judge tapped her gavel softly and intoned, "The defendant may present his case." James lifted his hand, waving away his fear. He rose, stepped to the podium with unhurried but resolute strides, and spoke in his rich, steady voice. "Your Honor, I come not merely to dispute a lease agreement, but to share my life's story, a story of sacrifice, responsibility, and human dignity." In the hush that followed, time itself seemed to pause. All noise stilled, yielding to James's voice, the voice of a veteran, of one who'd endured war and loss, yet stood firm to defend his beliefs and his final refuge. When the gavel's knock rang out, urging him on, the judge turned toward James. Her calm gaze seemed to wait for something unexpected. James lifted his head, inhaled deeply, then bent over the table, placing his palm on the cover of his file as if touching a treasure. From inside, he withdrew a yellowed sheet of paper, its corners frayed and bearing old fingerprints, a letter of commendation from Brigadier General William T. Grayson, dated March 15th, 2004. Slowly, with reverent care, James handed the letter to the judge. He spoke no words, letting his actions speak instead. The judge accepted the letter. She laid it on the desk, then lifted it before her eyes. She slowly scanned the italicized lines, her lips moving silently. At first, she skimmed quickly, as if verifying the document's authenticity. But when she read the passage about protecting the lives of civilians and comrades under enemy fire, her expression changed. Her brow furrowed slightly. A crease at the corner of her eye revealed surprise, mingled with respect. The pen on the desk halted. The rustle of paper sounded clear in the hush. Time in the courtroom seemed to freeze. Each breath felt weighty. The court clerk, hand poised over the keyboard, paused in mid-typing. The spectators at the edges, once murmuring, fell utterly silent. Their eyes flicked between the judge and James, curiosity and admiration intermingled. In the center, the young attorney's eyes widened, his confusion almost unbelievable. He snapped his phone closed. He stared at the letter as if fearing it to be an illusion. The judge cleared her throat. Her voice resonated through the chamber. "This letter, presented by Mr. Carter, is a commendation from Brigadier General William T. Grayson, dated March 15th, 2004. It recognizes Mr. Carter's heroic actions during the Fallujah campaign, protecting civilian lives and his fellow Marines under enemy fire, preventing a catastrophe for his unit. Each word she spoke struck the wooden bench like a nail driven home, sending a wave of emotion rippling through the courtroom. She paused, her gaze fixed on James. The 68-year-old man sat motionless, hands folded neatly atop his file, shoulders straight, his countenance somber yet resolute. In that moment, he was more than a poor defendant. He was a veteran who'd faced bullets and artillery, ready to sacrifice himself for others. James understood that this past, though more than 2 decades old, held enduring power. Power to make people pause, listen, and respect. The confident, even arrogant prosecuting attorney found no words to retort. He swallowed hard, lips parted in uncertainty. His eyes darted to the landlord seated beside him, a middle-aged man in a white shirt whose eyes now shone with astonishment. The landlord clenched his fist, perhaps wondering if distant battlefield deeds had any bearing on unpaid rent in Chicago. The judge folded her arms. The pen hovered above the letter. Then she raised her head, her voice warm yet incisive. "This is not irrelevant. Mr. Carter's military history and the honors he received demonstrate that he is not merely an ordinary individual shirking a financial obligation. He is someone who gave his all for his country, who placed his life in jeopardy to protect comrades and civilians." She paused, surveying the room, as though to affirm that her words would reshape everyone's perspective. The courtroom held its breath. Fluorescent lights glinted on the judge's thoughtful face. A bead of sweat formed on the young attorney's brow. The ticking of the wall clock grew pronounced. Each second seemed to slow as hearts pounded in anticipation. James remained composed. He did not boast of his deeds, yet his gentle, firm gaze conveyed unwavering confidence. When the judge spoke again, she leaned forward, her tone softer. At that decisive moment in Fallujah, Mr. Carter did not think of himself. His actions saved innocent lives, people unaware that a single courageous decision stood between them and certain death. She exhaled, bringing the courtroom back to reality. "We are here to adjudicate a civil dispute, yet we cannot ignore the humanitarian element and spirit of service that shape who Mr. Carter is. I will review the entire record, including his military commendations and the hardship he now faces." As her declaration echoed, the tenants in the gallery drew in breath. Some nodded in agreement, as if finding moral support in James's story. The court clerk hurriedly gathered the documents, ready to record this extraordinary turn of events. The prosecuting attorney bowed his head in silent acknowledgement that litigating a case requires understanding the person behind each contract. James did not smile. Yet when he looked at the judge, his eyes shone with a rekindled belief that justice is not mere rigid rules, but also empathy for individual circumstances and the value of each life. The courtroom, once divided between plaintiff and defendant, had become a shared space of listening and respect. When the judge rapped her gavel to conclude her initial remarks, the knock no longer sounded cold. It rang like a herald of true fairness, where every person has the chance for their story to be heard and honored. James straightened in his seat, as though emerging from a storm that had shattered years of solitude. He gathered his file. His expression remained composed, yet a spark of hope now glimmered within him. The courtroom exhaled. All eyes turned to James, the man who had seemed insignificant, yet carried a heroic past. They realized that reclaiming one's home does not require pitiful pleas, but the calm wisdom and undeniable proof of a life dedicated to service. In that moment, James Carter was no longer merely a struggling defendant. He stood as a symbol of dignity and courage. James nodded once, his eyes calm yet profound. Then he reached slowly for the file beside him. Without a word of introduction, he withdrew a length of soft cotton cloth, worn and frayed by time. His calloused fingers gently unfolded it, revealing a dulled silver star, its engravings and patina bearing decades of harsh memories. That star was more than decoration. It symbolized courage. The valor of a soldier who had faced bombs, bullets, and death every night. He placed the medal on the table before the judge. The medal glinted under the courtroom's cold fluorescent light. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the hum of the lamps softened, like a silent stage awaiting its decisive moment. No explanation was offered. James's gesture alone shattered the hush, drawing every gaze from the bench, the attorneys, to the spectators toward that dimmed star. The plaintiff's lawyer, once brimming with arrogant confidence, froze, his brows knitted in astonishment. The faint smile on his lips vanished, replaced by an unmistakable unease. The onlookers, who'd whispered and snickered moments before about this deadbeat tenant, leaned forward now, their eyes wide with shock and respect. Each face reflected the surprise of witnessing an unscripted, unannounced revelation. The judge, a middle-aged woman accustomed to hundreds of files each day, paused mid-pen stroke. She looked at James, then bent forward just enough to narrow the distance between her and the medal by a hand's breadth. Her voice fell low, gentle yet laden with gravity, as she asked, "Mr. Carter, please tell me why you brought this item to court." Not a rebuke, nor a sardonic barb, simply a direct question from the arbiter of law, yet one that commanded full attention. James met her gaze, shoulders square, his voice warm and resolute. "Your Honor, because people often forget, I just want to ensure at least one person in this room remembers." His words were concise, yet sharp as a blade, slicing through the courtroom's veneer of indifference. He made no accusations. He did not plead for pity. He demanded only one simple thing: acknowledgement of the past and its meaning. Silence reigned. All eyes fell on the ancient silver star, then lifted to James with new understanding. They realized that behind the frail frame, the salt and pepper hair, and the rough hands lay a life tested in fire and smoke, where hope and fear intertwined each moment. The judge frowned, perhaps weighing how this act of honoring relics might influence her forthcoming decision. She turned to the plaintiff's attorney, her tone firm yet encouraging. "I advise you to reconsider your attitude toward the defendant." The young lawyer tried to speak, but words failed him. He rose, closed his briefcase, and exited the courtroom in silence, his steps heavy with the loss of his earlier swagger. His departure left the space feeling hollow. All eyes shifted back to James. They sensed more than a civil dispute. They felt a story of honor, of the power of recognition and respect for the past. Tenants and landlords alike sat wordless, as if afraid to break this sacred moment with any careless remark. The courtroom's tension gave way to a hushed ticking of the wall clock. James did not force a smile, nor wear a look of triumph. He bent to pick up the silver star, carefully rewrapped it in its ancient cloth, and placed it back into his file. Each movement was slow, deliberate, affirming that the medal's value lay not in its metallic gleam, but in the indomitable story it carried. The judge returned to her bench, her expression still thoughtful. She set down her pen and arranged the papers before her, then looked to James. "Mr. Carter, I will review all the evidence, including what you have just presented. Your actions today demonstrate the dignity and seriousness you wish to have acknowledged." Though not a final ruling, her words opened a door to understanding and fairness. A collective sigh rippled through the room. The tenants nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with admiration for James, the man who dared speak up, who reminded them that every life has intrinsic worth, not to be dismissed because of financial hardship. They thought, if an elderly man with a tarnished medal can bring a courtroom to a standstill, then our own stories deserve to be told and heard. As the trial resumed, James remained seated. His hand trembled slightly as he marked a small notepad with the day's most important moments for the next phase of his hearing. He knew the legal battle ahead would be arduous, but today he had already won another fight, the victory of self-respect and recognition of the past. That dulled silver star would forever remind him of this moment, when justice became more than dry statutes and humanity was affirmed. The judge tapped her gavel once more. The knock sounded different now, less an order, more a declaration of a new chapter. James exhaled, his shoulders easing downward. He no longer felt alone or abandoned. The medal in his hand was no longer merely a relic of yesterday. It was proof of all he deserved. And no matter the final verdict, this day would remain etched in the veteran's memory, as a reminder that human worth is never to be forgotten. When the courtroom door clicked shut behind the young attorney, the entire space seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Then, from a corner, a gentle round of applause began, not thunderous, not ostentatious, but a solemn affirmation. A man in the second row placed his hands together, tapping lightly as if rousing his own slumbering conscience. Then a woman near the aisle hesitated, joined in. Soon, the courtroom rose in a silent symphony of recognition. They did not applaud because James had won his case. They applauded because they realized it was far too late to truly see the man before them. In that moment, James Carter sat unmoving, his gaze steady and unblinking. He lifted the tarnished silver star from its faded cloth, carefully refolded the fabric, then clutched his file to his chest. A seemingly ordinary gesture became sacred amid the swell of applause, as if he bore upon his shoulders the weight of a storied past and a quiet right to reclaim respect. The court manager, whose duty was merely to maintain order, stepped aside, not from obligation, but out of profound respect for James. His eyes followed the veteran's every step, as though witnessing a journey decades in the making finally find its reckoning. From her bench, the judge said nothing, yet her look conveyed everything, understanding and admiration for James's unwavering dignity. No verdict was needed. No sentence had to be pronounced, for truth had spoken its own worth. All the dry legal procedures, the binding paperwork, the sterile arguments, they yielded to this still moment, where courage and loyalty to one's past triumphed over contractual clauses. James turned and strode from the courtroom with a relaxed, yet resolute gait, like a soldier who had just fulfilled his final mission. Afternoon sunlight poured down the tiled corridor, casting mottled patches of light across the floor. James passed each doorway, each worn step, leaving behind the echo of applause and eyes brimming with emotion. At a metal bench outside the courthouse grounds, he paused and sat, its squeaks supporting him firmly. Passers-by glanced over but dared not intrude. They sensed this was a private moment, when James could set aside the legal battle and breathe the freedom following a tense ordeal. From his coat pocket, he withdrew the commendation letter dated March 15, 2004, from Brigadier General William T. Grayson. The blue ink of the signature had faded, yet its authenticity and power remained intact. James smoothed the paper. His finger traced the italicized lines recounting his heroic actions in Fallujah. where he placed his life before enemy fire to shield civilians. The letter was more than legal proof. It was the keystone affirming a soldier's character and spirit of sacrifice. A bus rumbled to a stop at the curb, its engine humming an invitation, yet James remained seated, clutching the letter, his gaze drifting to an old sign across the way. To those who served, to those who stand firm. The simple words, filled with empathy for veterans, gave him pause. He smiled quietly, needing no closer reading. He understood that every syllable spoke directly to men like him. Then he tucked the letter back into his file, buttoned his coat, and rose. Under the late afternoon sun, he walked down the bustling street. Horns blaring, towering buildings rising, each step carrying that silver star and the undying dignity of a lifetime of service. He did not rush home to his small apartment. Instead, he walked slowly, allowing himself to savor the return of respect. A feeling he once feared belonged only to distant memories. His pace slowed before a sidewalk cafe, its windows reflecting his silhouette amid the passing crowd. He did not enter. He knew today's victory needed no grand celebration. The quiet contentment of carrying his proud history in his heart was reward enough. He gazed upward at the evening sky, clouds tinged pink and gold by the setting sun, and offered a small smile, as if congratulating himself on a journey well worth every hardship. And so James Carter continued his life's path, without dramatic fanfare, without dead ends, but filled with dignity. He carried that dimmed silver star, the courage and loyalty to self and memory still shining as on the first day. To an American audience, James's story transcends a mere legal headline. It is a message that, in any circumstance, human dignity and remembrance of the past remain the guiding light for us all. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe so we can keep sharing these inspiring tales with friends and family across the USA.